I've been wanting to make this video for a long time. I have a lot of unfinished drafts, restarted drafts, Photoshop files for the thumbnails that I worked on when I should have been working on my drafts. In fact, I've taken so long to put this into words that the algorithm has begun taunting me by recommending me videos for this thing that I haven't even made yet, by these people who must have stolen the ideas from my brain. But as soon as this started to happen, I upped my efforts to finish writing about it myself, because I would actually like to watch some of these videos one day, but for now I'm aggressively telling YouTube not to recommend them to me until I'm done. I wanted to have my mind clear for what I wanted to say about this. But really, I suppose if this means one thing, it's that I'm not alone. I wasn't the only person to fall in love with the game and its world. There are others out there, like me, and if there's one thing we can learn from Cyberpunk, you can take your time before releasing something. It doesn't always have to be a race to get there first. So let's begin. It would have been sometime in the year of 2021 when I would spend my days playing Cyberpunk 2077 in my room. I would play it on my TV while basking in the glow of the daylight, and after sunset I'd close the curtains and transfer it over to my projector, where it would take up my entire wall. Due to the state the world was in at the time, this was a period where I was by myself a lot. I was isolated and unsure about the future, but honestly that could have been any time in my life. I was never a day one fan of this game. I didn't see the original trailer way back when, and for as much as I was interested in it, I didn't lap up that much of the copious trailers, PR, and feature coverage the game got. But I was still excited, and when the game came out, I got it day one on the PlayStation 4. I started playing and I thought, what is this shit? But thankfully I also had a decent PC at the time, and had actually been more of a PC player up to that point, so I got the game on that platform instead. And that's where it began. For this period in time, Cyberpunk 2077 was my world within my world. Having been a fan of the cyberpunk genre for years before, I suddenly had this world to explore and seemingly all the time to do it. Experiencing my first playthrough of the game, my character stood atop an abandoned radio tower, looking out across the desert at Night City, this urban monstrosity, with a sense of wonder for what it held for me. This was eventually bookended in the finale of the game, where I found myself, once again, looking over the city from afar, this time leaving it behind me instead. Throughout my time in this game, I remember being repeatedly struck by the beauty of the city, from all kinds of angles and locations. But what struck me even more were those moments you found yourself outside the city, looking in, seeing it exist in total still silence, juxtaposing the chaos and noise I knew it contained, with its columns of holographic commercials, illuminating the sky, reaching up higher than any building, like ribbons dangling from heaven. I've spent quite a lot of time trying to sum this feeling up, and I've replayed Cyberpunk a lot. I have hundreds of hours in game. In fact, when I wanted to capture footage from the game for this video, I was thankful that I am almost an obsessively frequent saver, because I had 500 save file games to choose from. This also had the effect of displaying to me in 4K those times when I apparently stayed up until 5 AM playing this game. But nowadays, more often than not, I find myself turning it on just to soak in the atmosphere, that saturated orange hue of a fading afternoon, that brilliant blue midday sky, or the evenings which, well, they speak for themselves. Sure, I blow up the occasional person's head, or kill the odd civilian by accidentally jumping on them like a Goomba, but it's Night City. So what is it about this game, this world, that keeps enticing me back to it? Why do I love this so much? I'm going to take you back a bit here, but bear with me, I think it's important. One of my earlier memories would be my dad having Star Trek on TV, a show that I would later go on to love for its moral conundrums and situations only possible through space exploration. And I still love all of that stuff now, but there was one other aspect I was interested in aside from this. Whenever the crew would happen upon a populated alien planet or vast grandiose civilizations, This would be depicted in the form of these amazing matte paintings, usually only featured for very brief establishing shots in singular episodes. Despite their brief appearances, I would be enamored by these images. Star Trek would motivate my interest going forward, and I would go on to explore Metropolis, Mass Effect, Star Wars. I became a fan of the visual futurist Sid Mead, who were designed for the iconic Blade Runner. I have another video planned where I talk about this all in more detail, so hold this thought for now. But it occurred to me, Cyberpunk 2077 feels like that background. It's one of those megacities, those futuristic metropolises that inspired me so many years ago, and for so many years since. This feels like a living, breathing, explorable version of one of those paintings, or one of those rendered backgrounds. So, I'm not going to tell you that this is the best game ever, that it has the most advanced, in-depth gameplay, that it has the greatest story ever told. But if there's something I've come to realise from getting older, it's that there's no such thing. I personally dislike the idea of boiling down art, creativity, to a demonstrable, arbitrary number. The truth is, you could have any opinion on the game. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong about Cyberpunk 2077. I won't even say that this game has been quote-unquote redeemed. This isn't one of those videos. But to me, I can't bring myself to get over this game. There's an old saying that goes, "They may forget what you said, but they will never forget the way you made them feel." So you see, this video is a tall task in of itself. I'm trying to describe the indescribable to you. I'm fully aware this game had its share of problems, but all I can tell you, and the only measure of which I can judge this, is that this game made me feel things. It still does. It would be easy to say that I like Cyberpunk because I like Blade Runner, and aesthetically and thematically they are similar. And I won't even lie to you, I'm sure part of it is as simple as that. But there are so many elements to this. The world, the architecture, the sound, the traversal, the music, the story. Night City, like most Cyberpunk locations, is a dystopian setting. A teeming city in the middle of a desert. Harsh, unforgiving, and violent. It might not be a real place, but it's certainly a representation of one. At least, a predicted one. Here we see not only marvels of the future, but derelict remnants of places abandoned to time. A corpse of industries long past. We have wealthy commercial areas as well as those that have fallen to crime or been handed over for commercial enterprise. Neon signs and advertisements, standing tall and finding you with their light, wherever you go. There are such a wide variety of places in this city, and I love all of it. Traditional sci-fi high-rises, brutalist structures, the busy city, the quiet outskirts, the desert, the peaks, the troughs. To me, the vision of Cyberpunk 2077 seems like a specific view of the future, with a kind of retro-futuristic spin on it. It would make sense as Cyberpunk the tabletop game, and the genre of Cyberpunk, has its roots in the 80s. And there is a certain romanticism I have for this style, probably harkening back to my love of old sci-fi. The design of the foil packaged processed foods, the modular apartments, the Back to the Future looking ass cars. Aside from the world and environment of the game, the story of Cyberpunk is one that I somewhat dismissed for quite a while. Don't get me wrong, I liked it. I really liked it. But I wouldn't have said it was particularly amazing or especially earth-shattering. However, taking into account what I said earlier, part of writing this whole thing has made me realise why it may have stuck with me so much. I've played every life path in the game and experienced every ending, Phantom Liberty expansion included. And after all of that, I still think that my first choice was the best combination. I begin as a nomad who has recently left their clan and ends leaving with new nomads, having found a new family. What it essentially comes down to is the idea of staying in Night City and continuing down the path of gigs, jobs, money, notoriety.
Night City is my city.
Night City is a cancer. Just look what it's done to you.
Realizing that you already have everything you need, and moving on, leaving the city and that life behind you. It may be a make-believe world, but this boils down to something that isn't too different from our everyday life.
Quiet life or blaze of glory?
Many of us are presented with our own prospect of these options in our real lives. Do whatever you can to make as much money as humanly possible, or make just enough to escape the rat race, so you never have to do it again. Now, I realise the irony of what I'm saying here. You want to escape the world that you spent this video telling us how much you loved? Well, kind of. Much like those people who say that Red Dead Redemption made them want to live in the 1900s American Wild West, or people being comforted by the Blade Runner vibe. Despite its dystopian landscape and hellish connotations, we idealise these versions of reality. Throughout the course of the game, so many of the characters we help end up leaving Night City behind them. Like us, their time here has come to an end, and we're there to facilitate it, to experience that moment they say goodbye, forever. Then it's the turn of our character. And finally, we're removed from our first-person perspective and see our character from an external camera for the first time in the game, the connection to them symbolically severed. As they go somewhere where we can't follow, all that's left is us, as a player, to say goodbye. Another one of my favourite childhood shows was a low-budget sci-fi comedy called Red Dwarf. In one of the episodes, they go into a VR game called Better Than Life. A few years ago, I became aware of a novelised version based on this premise that goes into much greater detail into the story than the show ever could. Better Than Life is a fully immersive video game that feels just like real life. So much like real life that you forget that it's not. The characters become stuck in the game and live their lives there for years, all while their bodies in the real world are slowly dying. The character called Rimmer gets married to a supermodel and becomes one of the most successful businessmen in the world. The character called the Cat, who is a humanoid evolved from cats, it's a weird show, lives in a palace surrounded by a moat of milk and married to half a dozen Amazonian women. Dave Lister, who is essentially the protagonist of the show, lives in a tiny snow-covered town named Bedford Falls after his favourite movie, It's a Wonderful Life. He has 2 sons and a wife, Christine Kachansky, who is the love interest he pursues throughout the duration of the TV show's insane 36-year runtime. Lister's experience is different though. In his fantasy, it's Christmas Eve every day, and he runs a restaurant that makes $10 of profit. But not only that, Lister knows that what he's experiencing isn't real. At some point, he goes to visit his other crewmates within the virtual world they live in. He tries to tell them the truth, but none of them believe him. He drives back to Bedford Falls, determined to leave by himself. He sees an exit door to the game under a neon sign, but he then becomes aware of the driveway leading up to his house, and notices a light sprinkling of snow begin to fall on it. It's Christmas Eve. What kind of a person would he be if he left his family on Christmas Eve? He tells himself he'll stay for one more night. He turns away from the exit and walks towards his house. The problem being, it's always Christmas Eve in Bedford Falls. I don't have a whole lot of time or energy to play tons of games anymore, although in the past few years I have managed to play games, and I've even completed some and enjoyed them. But when I think back to all of the games that I've booted up across that time, there is one that I've played consistently. I don't think you need me to tell you which one it was. And in my experience playing these epic open world story games, I came to realise that the premise across lots of them is often similar. And I don't think that's a coincidence. In so many of these games, you are pitted against the full weight of the powers that be they mega corporations, the police, the government, dictators, and you play as characters whose goal is to often leave the life they led behind them, to become somebody else, in the face of an overwhelming force, or under the all-seeing eye of an unbeatable enemy. It's almost like escapism within escapism. And when you strip away all of the grandiosity of these stories, I think we can easily relate to them in our own lives. I don't think it's too pessimistic of me to say that the world can be, at worst, against you, and at best indifferent to your suffering. So to have the power to reject that, to leave a world like that behind you, ironically, that may make it a world you love to revisit. When it comes to Cyberpunk, whether it's hopping onto it for an hour and running around the city, or starting a new game with a new character, I always seem to find myself back there, to return, to experience that limited time in Night City before I know it all ends. That pocket of existence in the year 2077, keeping that final mission at bay, to be in that loop once more. Before everything happened in 2020, I was pretty much at the end of my tether, busy, tired, sick. I lived and worked in the big city, doing big city stuff, and after everything happened and the world shut down, it was somewhat cathartic. Of course, I'd like to really stress here that I realised I was in a fortunate situation, and that I'm by no means glamorising this time period, or the events in which many people would not survive. I found myself being able to do lots of things I'd wanted to do up until that point, but could just never find the opportunity to do so. As well as taking the time to do more gaming, walking, gardening, I was left with my myriad of half-finished creative projects that I had dabbled in years before, one of which was one of the dozens of half-baked games that I'd begun. What I'm about to say to you might sound weird and far-fetched, but I went back and dug up some receipts. I purchased Cyberpunk 2077 on the PlayStation Store on the 10th of December 2020. I managed to get a few hours of playtime out of it. The last time I played it was on the 11th of December 2020. Then, after not being able to wait for a refund any longer, I caved and I bought another full-price version of the game on Steam on the 19th of December 2020. According to my records, on the 18th of December that year, I began working on a particular level on a game I was speculatively working on, using the time to make real progress. On the occasions where I've shown this to people, I've gotten comments that it reminds them of Cyberpunk 2077. And yeah, to be clear, as I was playing it at the same time, there's no doubt that Cyberpunk went on to have a huge influence on how I made this. But this was originally mostly inspired by Mass Effect, as seen by when I went from a rip-off from a Mass Effect dialogue wheel to a more Cyberpunk-themed one later. But why am I telling you this? I'm not really a believer in fate, and I'm not suggesting that this was some kind of destiny, nor am I suggesting that I made Cyberpunk before Cyberpunk. Quite the opposite, in fact. This was a culmination of almost all the influences that I've spoken about in this video. As many who are inspired by this genre, it's almost like a form of co-current evolution. With common influences and without a direct collaboration, we end up at similar points. What I also realised is that those of us who experienced this game during that time frame, when most of the world was locked away in isolation, with reduced human contact, even the people who didn't play this for years after release, playing this single-player game alone, we would come back together and share our experiences of it, only to find that those moments, the ones that I loved, that touched me, these were the exact same moments so many other people had too. This was during a time where I was not only able to delve into Cyberpunk fully, but my personal projects such as that game, and dedicate almost all of my time towards it, and my brain power, which would probably explain why it only equates to about 1 minute's worth of content. This was also around the same time where I began making these kinds of videos. A mere few weeks before everything began in 2020, in fact. I've been making videos for years, but I had never made videos including my voice. It was something I had genuinely struggled with for years previously, so in a way, This was somewhat of a character arc moment for me, my leveling up. Eventually, everything would return back to normal. I would go back to my life, back to working in that same big city, doing that same big city stuff. Except this time, I didn't quite feel like the same person I was. On one of my many faceless grey, indistinguishable 5:30 AM trains to work, a normal, boring, non-cyberpunk train, may I add, there was an advertising board on the top half of the carriage. It was an initiative where poetry was displayed. I'd seen these around before, but on this morning there was one by an Iranian poet, Garas Abdul Malakan, called Long Exposure. Even after letting go of the last bird, I hesitate. There is something inside this empty cage that never gets released. With most forms of media, I believe the time, place and point in your life in which you experience it really shapes the way in which you perceive it. When I think back to that period and everything associated with it, there is something inside me that I don't think can ever be the same. I still dabble in those personal projects of mine, although it's hit and miss, and as for those YouTube videos, I'm working on it. Cyberpunk is a bleak world. It has horrors much like our own, except on steroids. But it is a world that you can escape, and not just by merely exiting or turning it off, but by finishing your journey, going the whole way and completing it, an ending where you leave it all behind you for a better life, to heal from the hurt and the anguish, with new friends and loved ones, riding off into the stormy sunset, everything wrapped up in a beautiful package. But even after all of that, something remains in Night City that can never be released. One thing I haven't mentioned so far is the relic. No matter what you do in the game, V is living under the impression that they only have a short time left remaining. The relic is slowly killing them. The way I see it, what better way than to choose the ending, where you spend the rest of your days enjoying life, living free with those new friends and loved ones. It's what I would want to do in this situation. In fact, it is what I want to do in my own life. Perhaps none of this was as simple as leaving somewhere physically. Maybe it never was. Just as Night City is a place we've never actually been to in a literal sense, it may be the reason why we can never truly leave. For all the technology, cyberware, augments, hacking, AI, net running, this is a story about people banding together in an oppressive world, attempting to escape its limitless reach, in the midst of a time where not even death guarantees such a thing. Cyberpunk settings are often a distillation of the fears of modern society. It portrays a potential future where life is degraded, humanity eroding, societal divisions deepened, and suffering magnified in a whole new world of ways. But what Cyberpunk 2077 shows us, that against all logic, there is still resilience, resistance, redemption, friends, family, a hope for a better future. That stuff never fades away. Maybe this is why I keep going back to Cyberpunk 2077. Why I keep soaking myself in its atmosphere, basking in its sun, dashing through those neon-soaked streets, putting myself through that loop. One more time. Oh, and the music is fucking awesome too. I still struggle to contain and pin down all of the reasons why I love this game so much. But I hope this went some way to illuminating even a fraction of why I do. I really felt like this was a video I had to make. I realised that I could have gone into a deep dive on every area of the map, storylines, characters, lore, gameplay, all the little nuances. But I'm sure there are already so many other people who have done that better than I could have. I'm sure we all have our reasons for loving Cyberpunk 2077. But I wanted to emphasise why this is one of my favourite experiences on a personal level. And I hope I've done it justice in that respect.